So finally, the WrestleMania of all rap beefs have finally happened, and there's a lot of different things here at play with this Kendrick and Drake beef. Not only on the political side, the cultural side, and mainly the tech side. A lot of different fronts are happening in this whole clusterfuck of just multiple clashes. And Kendrick is actually testing Drake in a way he never really had to confront, which is things that are outside of the materialism, the sales, the braggadocious way that rappers normally are like, just who he is as a man, and culturally doesn't even know what he's supposed to be standing on. But even through all the beef, anytime you see Tupac Shakur and Biggie Smalls, it's not really a beef between both of them. It's really Death Row Records or Interscope versus Bad Boy, or whatever conglomerate was supporting Bad Boy at the time, if it was Columbia Records, Atlantic, etc. That's really the war right there. I know on the Tupac side, they had Jimmy Iovine, and on the Biggie side, whoever represented the label that P. Diddy was working for or just partnering up with. Those are the real clashes right there. So it's an East Coast versus West Coast battle among the record sales. It's not necessarily between the two personalities. And with Kendrick and Drake, it seems like the same thing is playing out here, but there is a cultural clash here. Because Universal Records, there's a number of things that they're trying to make happen. They're actually battling AI with TikTok, while at the same time, they have plans on using AI to condition the consumer to be comfortable listening to that type of music so they can cut out the middleman with the artist. And Drake overall, what he represents to Universal Music Group, he is the ultimate algorithm. He is the music industry right now. It is him. He's actually built into the system, very similar to Russell Simmons, Jay-Z, Dr. Dre. If you look at most of the rap moguls, they were all born around the same year. And Drake is one of the few stars that actually came up with the streaming era, with that era just coming up, Apple Music giving him that deal, him actually being built into that Spotify algorithm. He is the ultimate algorithm, and it's very inorganic for hip hop to have anyone in the #1 spot as long as Drake has been there. That's how you could tell most of his stuff is very inorganic. And a lot of people in the culture seem like they're sick of it. They're sick of it. The guy makes good music, but there's something not authentic at this point. The longer he stays at that #1 spot, the more it's going to be revealed how inorganic it is. And the consumers will start to see it. It's not going to take a rap beef to expose it. It's very inorganic in the culture of hip hop to have a #1 guy occupy the top spot for 10 to 15 years. It's just not possible. It's not part of the culture. That's like saying you have an NBA champion for 15 years in a row. You know something is up. Like, really? There was no injuries? There was nothing? Like, this guy just was perfect for 15 years? It's the same thing in hip hop. There's newer generations that come in. They bring in new sounds, new waves. It's very inorganic for someone to occupy that top spot for all those years. And Drake has basically become the institution. He's got Nike behind him. He's got Universal Records behind him. And just with the algorithm play, using Tupac and Snoop Dogg's voice, he's actually introducing Universal Music's plan, or just the music industry's plan on using AI. And again, there's a lot of cultural, a lot of inner battles going on within this beef. First of all, Kendrick, the tracks he dropped, a few of them were not monetized. So it'll actually allow content creators to actually use the song and fully monetize their videos. While at the same time, if you check out the way Kendrick put his tracks on Spotify, he was actually referenced as the only writer. Meanwhile, Drake, of course, whatever he puts out has to be monetized. There was a couple other people that were credited in the songwriting on some of his disses. We've never really seen this type of shit before. But again, that motherfucker Drake is built into that algorithm, boy. I mean, very unfortunate for Lil Wayne. He was a couple years off from his prime years of being built into the same algorithm. But Drake came up at a good time. He actually probably notified Lil Wayne that the money was fucked up with Birdman, or just Universal, whoever. And Drake was probably trying to correct his situation, and the timing just came out perfect for him to be built in, just streaming in general, dropping all those albums, being exclusive to Apple even at a point. but there's a lot of multi-cultural wars going on in this. And it seems like just Drake being that ultimate algorithm right now, he just swallows up whoever comes out. And it's a very inorganic thing for hip hop to have new artists come up and the number one guy sort of swallows up their wave and you just never hear from them again. It's inorganic to the culture itself and its whole history to have someone sit at the number one spot for that long. I mean, I believe Drake is almost approaching 15 years on it. And also the modern celebrity, in a way, culturally, is being exposed because leaving yourself too open on social media, you know, with the pics, the memes, you know how Drake likes to kind of overexpose himself on social media, and it seems like it's actually backfiring on him on this rap beef. And you also have a lot of publications who don't fucking cover hip hop that are making up all kinds of rules that Kendrick is going overboard. Once again, Drake is plugged into the machine. Billboard, you know, all these major media conglomerates like Complex, they're all part of the system. And when you see articles come out saying Kendrick went too far, why is Kendrick questioning his racial lines or his cultural way he was brought up? It's just a lot of different moving parts going on right here. But again, TMZ commenting on some of these things, this is an entity that does not understand hip hop culture, and we got to be aware that there are publications that are trying to make up rules for rap beef, even though Drake had mentioned Kendrick's wife. So he brought this beef onto a whole nother level, and there are no rules in these beefs. Death will be the final destination if it has to. It's in the history books. So once again, it's interesting with the publications that just really cover hip hop because it's popular, but they have no understanding of the culture. And TMZ is definitely one of them. I don't know how the fuck Van Lathan used to work for them. That platform right there, they just hop on any wave. But mainly, the biggest thing in this rap beef is the AI that was rolled out. And right now, Spotify is in a proxy war with the record labels and also the distribution companies as far as kind of trying to eliminate the market share of independent artists on that platform. That's why they elected to not pay people unless they hit a certain amount of streams. But per stream, there's still money being generated. Where does that go if they don't pay to, you know, if you don't have 1,000 streams, maybe you have 800. Where does the money go from that? And how many independent artists have 800 streams? And then you collect it from all those artists that got to equate to some sort of money. So the record labels are kind of playing a funny game with Spotify, having them implement all these rules, while at the same time, Spotify does have AI already in their, I would say, in their ecosystem that have no name, no author. It's hard to tell if it's even real, and it's merged into some of these playlists. So they actually have a way of keeping royalty checks to themselves. Like, this is a whole clusterfuck of a lot of different things. But once again, Drake is baked into the ecosystem. To have an AI set up like that already on deck, just all the music videos that Drake dropped that look like they cost a lot of money to do them that fast. Like, this guy is really fucking built in. But an interesting interview right here where they spoke about AI's threat to music and just the overall industry, as streaming in general right now, it's turned music into sort of a passive kind of afterthought, like the lights in your house. You don't even consider those things, they're just on. But it's not until the power goes out you really appreciate the lights. And they sort of turn music into the same thing. It's just a bunch of background noise at this point, and the playlist is just gonna curate the next thing to you. So very blindly you could be listening to AI and not even know it. And the AI is a path to the record labels or the streaming services not to pay the artists. So there's a lot of proxy wars going on. Once again, the music industry, this is completely their fault for not understanding when they first teamed up with Apple for the iPod to list all their songs on the iTunes store, to allow Apple to actually build $1 billion business selling iPods off the backs of their music. They sort of not only pigeonhole themselves to a price point where each song costs $1. Now you don't even have to sell a whole album, just a song. It's like the music industry continues to kind of dummy down their product to fit with the tech companies who really don't even give a fuck about the music, because they always have an ulterior motive into building their companies. But you guys check out this interview with Ted Goya as he reflected on AI's threat to music, and every once in a while I'll check in.
Well, AI is everywhere right now, and it's the hot topic in music. But the question is, how much is it being used? And the problem is there's not a lot of disclosure. What we see about AI is almost a secret. And this is probably the biggest warning sign for me, is if AI is really so wonderful, if it's so exciting, if it's so tremendous, why do they have to keep it a secret? And I see this everywhere. Now, I'm going to talk about music in a second, but let me just look at some of the other fields. Like, I'm in writing.
Yep.
And there are these AI articles everywhere, but no disclosure. A few months ago, Sports Illustrated, right before it collapsed, had this great idea of saving money by using AI to write articles. And you know,
Man, it was even worse than that. Not only did they use AI to write articles, they actually outsourced. They actually outsourced another company to get the AI, or even to find the writers to write the articles. So they try to blame it on the outsourcing company, when eventually, if you go down the line and look at the paperwork, Sports Illustrated is just a name at this point. It's just a name, and the name actually gets licensed out to other companies so they can use it. It's a whole clusterfuck. Sports Illustrated is not really what we think it is. At this point, it's just a brand that's just holding kind of digital real estate at this point.
You know what they did? Is they actually assigned the names of people to the articles. Well, this article is by Bill Smith or Nancy Jones or whatever. And then they would have bios and a web page for these authors that did not exist.
And as soon as they got caught, they deleted everything. My God. But you could even tell that all these articles were written by AI. I'm wondering how they sourced these articles and got the AI to write them. How many previous writers did they kind of copyright their material? This is very interesting, but we all know the government's going to be real slow on the rollout for this AI.
Because they were ashamed
Unbelievable.
of using the AI.
Yeah.
And this is spread everywhere. In books, I had now AI books come out trying to steal my readers, and they attribute the books to Mr. Joya. Frank Joya wrote this book on jazz. And basically, they're targeting the readers of my jazz book, but deceptively. At no point do they say, this book is written by AI. So I actually looked at all the new music books that were listed on Amazon and tried to figure out which ones are by real authors and which ones are by AI. And you can't figure it out. There's no honesty there. So let's now look at music. And in music, my fear the same thing is happening. On Spotify, one of the users, a fellow named Adam Faze, was listening to Spotify, and he kept hearing the same song over and over again. He said, this is interesting. He started paying attention every time the song came on. It was a 41-second song.
Okay.
He saw it had a different name and a different artist. Now, wait a second, this song sounds almost identical to the one I heard. So he compiled a playlist of 49 songs that were more or less identical, but they had different names, different artists, and were attributed to different composers. Now, what's going on here? That can't be true. Now, it's obvious to conclude, and I can't prove it though, is this is Spotify's way of using AI. They have AI songs. They attribute them to people that don't exist, like Sports Illustrated, and this allows them to take royalties that would go to musicians and keep them for themselves. If they can own the work themselves, created by AI, they're going to be able to maximize their revenues. Now, I can't prove this is happening at Spotify, but it's hard to think of some other explanation for what's going on. So this is the real story behind AI. AI is the hot thing in music, but not because it's great music. I've never met anyone where I say, what's your favorite genre of music? Oh, I love this AI stuff. Yeah, I just can't. This AI music is my favorite genre. I've never met, maybe that person exists. I've never met them. So the AI is happening not because it's great, not because it has a fan base, not because it allows some improvements over the music that lowly.
Does that not sound like Mark Zuckerberg's Meta? When he first tried to roll that out, there was no real demand. People weren't necessarily going crazy to be on a metaverse sitting in their house with goggles on. That seems like a push by tech companies to actually gain kind of your eyeballs, kind of like same way they have your fingerprints. Now they want your eyeballs. And then now they have a better way of accessing more data from you in order to sell it and also give you advertisements within the goggles. But when it comes to that metaverse, you could tell it's a complete tech rollout. And it's the same thing with the AI music. Nobody's rushing to listen to a computerized version of a song. Songs have to have soul in them, man, to be popping. There's a human element to music that makes a song good. So robotic music does not even sound appealing. Just that whole phrase does not sound appealing at all. Only a techie would think something like that is appealing. Once again, these guys, they're very 1 + 1 = 2. There's nothing artistic about people in the tech space, in the engineering field, in the math science / field. There's nothing artistic about these people, and there's nothing wrong with that. Their profession requires them to kind of be straightforward, look for the final answer. 1 + 1 = 2, and it'll always be that. With artists, 1 + 1 = gray area. That's how art is made. That's how the brain of an artist operates. That's why you never heard of a mathematician who's become a fucking world-renowned artist. You never heard of that shit. Those two things don't even clash.
Folks like you or I would make, it's being used to save costs in a deceptive way. And that's my fear, is that what's happening with AI is it's a cost savings measure being forced duplicitously on the market for the benefit of the companies and hurting the fans and hurting the musicians.
Okay, what about TikTok and AI?
Well, this is the same question. It was very interesting. A few months ago, Universal Music pulled all their songs off of TikTok. And they complained bitterly, and they complained about royalties, but the other thing they complained about was AI. They said, well, we're not going to come back to TikTok till you get rid of AI, because we fear you're using AI to do exactly what I talked about. Is you're going to move the audience to AI music so you don't have to pay Universal Music. And just a few days ago, Universal Music came back to TikTok.
That's right.
Apparently they patched up their differences, but I've seen no statement from TikTok that they're getting rid of AI. They're wedded to that. And one of the things I think you're going to see is no one will ever spell it out for you. You won't see the head of Spotify or TikTok or any of these companies say, we're going to squeeze the musicians and the labels with AI. They don't say that, but that has to be what's happening. Is people go to war against these big tech platforms. And I always predict that the tech platform will win the war. And I've been right every time. Every time I've been correct. And it's sad, you see Universal Music say, well, we're going to go to war with TikTok and force them to give in. And if Universal Music can't do it, Universal Music controls what, 35%?
32%.
32% of the recordings out there. If they can't get concessions from TikTok, who can? And around that same time.
And at the same time, the stance that TikTok took, Spotify should have taken the same stance when they first started up. I don't know why they felt the need that they should have been committed to all the old catalogs the record labels had. They could have went on and created an open platform similar to SoundCloud and actually have the artists, give them the power, the brand new artists going forward in the 2010s, the ability to maintain their catalogs, have publishing rights, and then pay them their royalties directly and not actually listing the old catalogs. You have to look at all the new artists Spotify could actually empowered in the 2010s up until now. They would have had their catalogs, but once again, that venture capital money that comes in, it supports these companies when they first start out. I don't really know what's the pressures that they actually put on these guys to make a profit right away. But it eventually it's going to hurt Spotify because right now they're in a rock and a hard place as far as their business model.
Neil Young came back to Spotify. You know, he said, I'm never going to be on Spotify again. Joni Mitchell came back to Spotify. And I don't blame them because what choice do we have?
No choice.
The platforms set the rules and the rest of us have to follow them. And this would be okay if those people really knew and loved music. But look at the people that run these platforms. They're not music lovers like you and me or your audience out there. These are people that are techies and they have completely different goals and priorities.
As I alluded to before, and they have completely different mindset. Ted is nailing it right on the head. I have friends that are in the tech world and the mindset is completely different. There's not an artistic bone in their body. because the tech mindset is actually developed at a very young age in school. You can't necessarily just all of a sudden become an engineer in your mid 30s or even in your mid 20s. You can't just all of a sudden start looking at math equations like that and develop that mindset. It's possible, but it's going to be very, very difficult. That's why those type of careers and those type of people are actually cultivated at a very young age in those STEM programs.
Than having a flourishing music ecosystem. They want to benefit themselves. They want to benefit their companies financially. And if the music suffers, well, they just are willing to live with it. Well, there are bots out there, and I don't want to minimize the impact. People tell me that there's money laundering going through Spotify using bots, and that this is how people, they get their dirty money. They have the bots run up plays for some track, and then the money comes back from Spotify and it's been laundered.
Facts. The whole music industry was kind of built off of the money laundering scheme. But, the scammers, they got to scam, man. But the music industry, once again, it was birthed underneath that titty, man. They got to suck on that shit dry.
Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I've heard that. I'm actually more worried about something else, in that trusting that the numbers are accurate and that people are actually listening. Places like Spotify still have games they can play. Let me give you a very amazing example, I think. The story of Johan Röhr from Sweden. Very interesting individual, Johan Röhr, because he has achieved 15 billion streams on Spotify. Now that's a large number. Let me tell you how large it is. That's
number.
more than Michael Jackson.
Right.
That is more than Elton John. It's more than ABBA. It's nobody out there, with maybe 2 or 3 exceptions in the whole world, can get the kind of streams Johan Röhr is. Nobody knows his name. Now, why is that? Well, Johan Röhr never uses his own name in his music. He has 656 different aliases. Sometimes there's a man or a woman or different national groups or whatever. He never uses his own name. He uses 656 different names and then shows up on all these playlists. He is on 144 different official Spotify curated playlists, reaching 62 million people. Sometimes he's 40% or more of a single playlist, but no one knows about it because the name changes. So they're able to push all this traffic to Johan Röhr. Now, why is Spotify doing this? Now, I got an email from somebody, and I can't say if this is true. They said, Ted, you didn't hear this from me, but Spotify owns all the rights to those songs, and they're using this.
Big surprise. He's Swedish. Spotify's
I know, right?
Now, for all the artists right there, that lets you know off rip that Spotify was never in the business of paying you guys anyway. That penny per stream number that they came up with, talking about CD sales, when Spotify is a tech platform and the artists today don't even know what it is to walk into a store and buy a CD. So why your streams are really measured off a CD sale, a fraction of a CD sale, shit doesn't make any sense. But at the end of the day, Spotify was never in the business of paying any artist. And the royalty rates or just the stream rates that someone like Drake or Taylor Swift or any other big name artist gets, it's a complete different number than versus what Spotify tells you is the normal stream rate for everyone else. Trust and believe, Taylor Swift, Beyonce, and others could just sell their music online and they'll make millions. And it doesn't take a large percentage of their fan base to buy their CDs for them to make millions. I would say 5% of their fan base bought their CDs, they'll make millions off of that. So you got to ask yourself, how come these people don't really go direct to consumer in a real way? Especially with the advent of social media, they could just promote it there. Hey, Swifties, and with Beyonce, the Beehive, they'll all flock to their websites and buy up their CDs, merchandise, etc.
I know, it goes right down the street from the Spotify headquarters. Right. Now, I can't prove that they are using Johan Röhr to avoid paying royalties to real musicians. But what other explanation can they be? And let me give you a sort of a hint of the disparity here. I started looking at his music, and the music is all just, banal background music, nothing to get excited about. And I found one of his tracks on Spotify that had gotten 4 or 5 million plays.
Okay.
Then I found the same track on YouTube it had 100 plays.
Right.
Well, wait a second. If this is such a great song,
Right. Exactly.
if everybody loves this song, why does it only get 100 plays on YouTube? So what I'm worried about is there are these games that are being played. There's no disclosure. And this is not good for the music ecosystem again.
Right.
They're forcing this music on people, and they're only able to do it because the listening experience has become so passive. In the old days, you went and bought an album. You always knew who you were listening to because you had purchased this record
Right.
with hard cash you had to reach into your pocket to get. Spotify has deliberately tried to turn the listening experience into something passive. Now, is that good for the music culture where people don't know the name of the artist? You see this all the time.
Yeah.
Something will be playing in the radio and someone will say, oh, I love that song, but they don't know the name of the artist. They don't know the name of the song. Is this good? I don't think so. And so I worry about all these ramifications that these corporations are trying to maximize their income. And God bless them. I hope they have nice corporate jets and the yachts and the whole 9 yards. But what they're doing is not good for the music culture. And that's why there's a certain sense of stagnancy now.
AKA Drake. This is why you see Drake relevant for 15 years in a row. I'm telling you, the more years that pass by and him still staying up top, dropping these mediocre albums that everyone's consensus is that it's mediocre, but yet it's pushed in front of you in the algorithm. Even if you're someone that listens to folk music, Drake will be in the top of your Spotify as soon as you open the app. Same thing for Apple Music. Shit on mine the other day, I seen Ice Spice, and I don't even listen to anything close to her kind of music. The only female artist I listen from time to time is Nicki Minaj, maybe. But for the most part, she is not my demographic. But yet, she's still pushed in front of my face.
In the music culture, it doesn't feel like there's anything vibrant happening. And that's by plan. I fear that's by plan, that the most powerful people in the world controlling music, who are the CEO of Spotify, CEO of Apple, these are the people that actually control music now. They're not musicians, they're not music lovers. They're taking steps that create the stagnancy.
Wasn't the Spotify business model flawed right from the beginning? There's a
Yes, that's what I said earlier. It was flawed from the beginning. They should have took the risk and say any new artist going forward, you can upload your music directly through here. Here's the royalty rate. We have a whole other department just to deal with artist relations. And hey, we might even set up a sub-label where we develop artists. But the back catalogs that the record labels have, the Michael Jackson, the Beatles, they don't have to upload it here. Because eventually the tech will triumph. Because eventually the audience will grow accustomed to the convenience of having the music on the app. So eventually the record labels would approach Spotify wanting to be part of their marketplace. But again, the venture capital money that supported Spotify in that initial launch was probably looking for a rate of return. And the same people that actually funded Spotify was the original record labels. Because once they went public, we found out the payouts and the large sums of money, Universal, Sony, Columbia, all the record labels had stake in Spotify. The same way they have stake in Instagram, TikTok, etc.
there's only a certain number of people that can afford to pay. When you have a subscription model like that pretty much all subscription models eventually run out of people.
Well, I ran the numbers back in 2018 when Spotify listed on the stock exchange. I got the public filing, and this is what I do. I analyze all the numbers. I'm sort of an analytical nerd, and I did all the math. And in 2018, I said, this streaming model doesn't work. There's no way they can charge $9.99 a month for all the music you want to listen to and make a profit.
Right.
They will never achieve a user base to do that. Well, it took them 18 years from inception to find out that I'm right. And so finally, what you've seen in the last year is Spotify started raising prices dramatically.
Well, that's all they can do.
As did Netflix and all these places, because they realized that the model they had been working with wasn't going to deliver enough cash to pay all the stakeholders.
Yeah.
And so now we're in a situation where the whole streaming model is built on cutting costs, raising subscription prices, and then playing these little games. And I think it's very ominous that just a few days ago, Netflix announced that they are not going to tell shareholders how many subscribers they have anymore.
Cutting costs, raising the prices for the consumers. It's just everyone loses. Like, what is Spotify's product? They really don't have one. They're just a middleman and have the platform. But overall, they don't have a product. They don't have a phone that they sell that comes with Spotify already pre-installed, or just the main functionality app the same way Apple does. They don't have a powerful engine that's been collecting data for years like Facebook. They're just in a weird spot. They're just in a very, very weird spot. And judging from the Joe Rogan deal, you can tell most of his viewers did not follow him to Spotify. He gets way more YouTube hits than he does Spotify views. People don't necessarily go to Spotify to watch videos. They go to YouTube for that. It has to be taken into consideration what the audience is actually going to the platform for. They're accustomed to certain platforms for certain things, and Spotify is not that for video.
Well, this is amazing because for years they've been bragging about subscriber growth and we're going to get more growth. And this is the whole engine of our business is adding more subscribers. The last quarterly report, they said, the subscriber stuff, we're not going to tell you about that anymore. Don't worry about it. Now, what does that mean? It means that they have given up trying to attract the audience and get the audience excited and build it. They're going to cut costs. They're going to raise prices, and they're going to play all these crazy games with their algorithms and whatever. And that's sad. So it's happening in movies. This is happening in books. It's happening in journalism, and it's happening maybe most of all in music. The musicians are like the canaries in the coal mine. They're the first ones that die and topple over. And after the musicians go, everyone else would say, wait a second. That's because it's going to, whatever your job is now, the same kind of AI stuff is going to happen there down the line. So you should pay.
The only way it's not happening to the musicians is if they're built into that. And I believe Taylor Swift, Drake, and a few others are built into the system. They're going to have to prop up their numbers, even though if it's fake, to solidify that the platform has users.
Pay attention, even if you're not a musician or you don't depend on the music business. You should care as a fan, but even beyond that, you should care because this is the same thing that's going to happen throughout culture. Coolness no longer was some personal quality you had. It was used to market a product. Mm-hmm. And then the whole coolness in society disappeared. A chapter in my book is called America's Lost Its Cool. People are just angry at each other. Used to be, I'd get together with my bros and we tried to be as cool as possible. Now even the word hipster became a term of abuse. Coolness became suspect, and sort of this culture of anger and outrage emerged. It's a 50, 60-year cycle. Curiously enough, I was reading a book by Ray Dalio, the finance expert, the super investor, and he says in finance there's a 50, 60, 70-year cycle too. And he says the reason people don't understand this, and this gets back to the point you were mentioning, is that the cycle generally takes a whole human lifetime. So
it's crazy. In rap, the cycle takes about 3 to 4 years. Sometimes 3 to 2 years, the cycle changes. That's why it's so inorganic for Drake to be the #1 guy for about 12 to 15 years. The cycle, it's been ended already for him, man.
We only live through the cycle ourselves once.
One time.
Now, if you live old enough, towards the end of your life, you start seeing a repetition of what happened when you were starting out.
Right.
Because the cycle is starting to repeat. Now,
and it's definitely starting to repeat in hip hop because Drake actually came in the industry when baggy clothes was still popular. And it was transitioning to skinny jeans. And now it's transitioning back onto baggy pants, which you see him wearing all the time. That's why I said him being the #1 guy in the genre is very inorganic. This guy's been around too long. It's inorganic to the fucking culture in itself.
What do we see happening in culture right now is we have had in commercial music a lessening in the complexity of music decade after decade after decade.
Right.
To the point now, most of the hit songs now are these 4-chord songs.
Yeah, if that.
If that. You're lucky to get those 4 chords. And a lot of people think, well, that's the way it will always be. Even you and I, at times, we get depressed. And we say, you know what, where are the great maximalist songs of the past where all sorts of surprising things happened and chord changes and unexpected interval leaps? Where have they all gone?
Well, in the hip hop space, I would say Metro Boomin has actually achieved this. His songs actually don't stay consistent. They switch up, I would say, every 40 seconds. There's a major change. But very few producers do this. There's way too many producers out here using the same kind of drum kits or just, oh man, it's bad out here, man. It's bad. And it really starts with the producers. Then it goes to the rappers.
And if I asked you who were the great people at writing songs with this sort of maximalist, I'm going to surprise you aesthetic, the names we would come up with would all be dead people or people 70 or older.
That's right.
So we would mention McCartney or Stevie Wonder or Joni
Bacharach.
Mitchell, Bacharach, Sondheim. And I know many people think, well, that day is gone. It'll never come back. But I believe these things come in cycles. There was a period back in the early 50s when music was getting very simple, and then with the Beatles and Bacharach
right.
and all that, started getting more complex again. And so there is a cycle, and generally this is the very interesting thing. I got this from a book called The Alchemy of Finance by George Soros, who's sort of a strange guy, but he had this theory. He calls it the theory of reflexivity. And this has been very useful to me in predicting trends. What Soros says, and he's actually became a billionaire using this. He traded currencies. And this was his theory of reflexivity that made him a billionaire. And he said, the secret is the trend always goes on longer than is sensible. And it will eventually reverse, but it has to get to a ridiculous extreme before it reverses. So even when you say, well, the songs couldn't possibly get simpler, they can't possibly get simpler than they do. What Soros will say, eventually it has to push to an extreme and then it reverses because people are so tired of it.
Does this not sound like the whole Drake and Kendrick beef? The way that the culture reacted to Kendrick's songs is a symptom of them being tired of Drake. Kendrick killed it, by the way. I don't want to say his songs suck, because they definitely did not. But it's like the way people reacted to it. There's an extra energy to it. If you've been in the culture long enough, you understand. When people are feeling a way about something and they can't wait to get a certain energy out, there's a certain release that DJ Mustard's song had with Kendrick, that the culture was just needing to get out. But they've been force-fed Drake for so long, they didn't even know that they even needed to get it out. That's the way it felt.
Does this happen in culture? Well, let me give you an example of where it's happening right now in the culture. Look at movies. Mm-hmm. The folks at Disney said, well, all we got to do is a Star Wars movie and a Marvel movie every 10 weeks, and we're going to get rich.
Right.
And that worked, and it worked, and it worked, and it's...
Same thing for Drake. He dropped album after album after album after Views, and it kept working and working and working. This is a great analogy right here. This is Drake completely right here.
At a certain point, it just seemed ridiculous. But even at the point where it got ridiculous, they kept on doing it. And then finally, the box office receipts stopped. I've done the analysis.
That sounds like For All the Dogs too. The appraise from the audience actually stopped. That album was enough from the audience. Once they heard Drake in the same beat as Yeet and some of the other artists he had on there and the co-signs from Lil Yachty, the culture just had enough.
On this, and you see the monthly box office in the movie business is awful. There was a big burst for...
And that's no disrespect to Yachty. I love Yachty, man. Yachty is I don't want to say he's a pioneer in the culture, but he does have talent. Very talented dude, but Drake is just, that's not his demo, man. That shouldn't be his demo. But when you commercialize yourself like the way he did, or just choose that path, Drake got to accept everything with it. And eventually, you're going to be looked at as the jester, the sort of clown for the culture. Because you can only commercialize yourself up until a certain point in hip hop.
A few weeks with Barbie and Oppenheimer.
That's right.
But that's gone.
Yeah.
Now, if you go back before the pandemic, the movie business had more than $10 billion in box office receipts for more than 10 years in a row. The way it looks now, it'll never hit those numbers again. And it's because they push the formula to the ridiculous extreme, and then it will reverse. And I think that's going to happen in movies. I think it will happen in music. And so people always look at me and say, Ted, you're full of doom and gloom. And I say, well, no, I'm actually optimistic. But I believe you've got to get to the bitter end of the cycle, and then it will reverse.
Do you think that that movies and music are on the same cycle, or does one precede the other?
I think they're on similar cycles. And so I always pay attention to movies. And I ask myself, what has happened in the past when the formula didn't work? And so I look at, for example, the 1960s. Going into the 60s, there were two formulas in Hollywood that always worked: the Western movie,
right,
and the musical. And so they pushed these, and it was everywhere. When you and I were growing up, there were 3 TV networks, and every one, at any night of the week you turn on, there would be a Western on one of those 3 channels. Sometimes there was a Western on 2 or 3 of them. It's just Westerns were everywhere.
Yeah.
And
Well, yeah, they definitely were everywhere, because my mother wasn't even born in this country. She's from a small Caribbean island, and man, I was shocked. She knew who Clint Eastwood was at a young age before she even came to America. Like, that's crazy. Clint Eastwood? Are you serious?
And they pushed it to a ridiculous extreme, to a point where even the most devoted fans of cowboy...
Even Clint Eastwood stopped making them.
No, even Clint... No, that's great. Even Clint Eastwood stopped making the Westerns. And the musical died out, too. You had, like, The Sound of Music, and then after that, it was almost impossible to have a hit musical movie.
That's right. Yeah.
So what happened in the movie industry then? I think it's very interesting. The studios were desperate. And they said, well, we've got to take chances now, which we hate to do. We here in Hollywood, the thing we hate to do is take chances, but we have no other alternative. So as the Western died, the musical died, the formulas died, they started doing these edgier films, these grittier films, these risk-taking films. So you have things like The Godfather and Chinatown and Taxi Driver, and some people will tell you these were the best movies of all time, but the fact is, they were edgier, they were grittier, and they were full of risk-taking because Hollywood had no other option.
Well, if you look at The Godfather, they tried to get Coppola kicked off the movie many times.
The studio hated it.
They hated it.
Pacino, they hated
Pacino
a million times that nothing worked on this movie.
That's right.
If you're going to do a crime movie, you got to have shoot-ups every 5 minutes. But Coppola understood you needed to do something different at that stage in cinema history.
Yeah.
I believe we're at exactly that same point now. What's the one thing Hollywood would hate to do right now is anything edgy.
That's right.
Don't do anything edgy. But that's what the audience is hungry for. So Hollywood is now in a point where they're going to have to take risks and do things that are a little bit different, more ambitious. I think music's the same way. Mm-hmm. I think music is the same way because
And the culture right now is definitely the same way. We're kind of sick of the same rollout of Drake not really saying anything in these songs. Publications telling us that he went #1 again, but yet most of us really didn't even listen to the album. And for any new acts that come after him, I pray to God that they do not collaborate with this guy, because at this point he's really Agent Smith from the Matrix. Once he puts his hand in you, he converts you to him, and you just stay stuck in the algorithm forever underneath him.
That same period where you had this risk-taking in movies, you had it in popular music too. You know, the Beatles broke all the rules. So there was a period of like 5, 6, 7 years, you could do anything.
Yeah.
You could do anything if you were a rock or pop act, and the record labels understood we've got to give these people some freedom. And it drove them nuts to give people like Brian Wilson freedom because he would do crazy things. But that worked once, and I know people don't believe it's possible. I hear people say, Ted, these record labels will never give people creative freedom the way they did in the past. And I said, they will not have a choice.
And one industry you see not having a choice is the sports media industry. The fact that ESPN now is more personality driven, they have to get the Pat McAfees, they have to get Stephen A. Smith, or just any personality on there that can actually bring in an audience, because that's where the business is headed. The Shannon Sharps. I mean, we've never actually thought ESPN would ever let someone work for the network almost on a part-time basis. And guys like Shannon actually spend more time working on his own network with Colin Cowherd, who works for a rival company in Fox Sports.
They will not have a choice because the formula eventually dies.
When the music industry started to collapse after Napster happened, 1999, and then profits started to decrease after the year 2000, dramatically every year.
Absolutely. 1999 was the peak year for the music industry.
So then the labels started saying, okay, we need to hire producers that can write songs. Okay, we need to hire, we're going to have less money, so we have to hire producers that can also mix the songs. Then it became.
See, it seems like they try to cut costs within the industry instead of looking outwards and say, hey, why don't we develop our own tech space where we can host the music, host the videos, create a kind of curate an environment where listeners can come and collaborate and appreciate the music or create music of their own. They never thought like that because they're not really in the business of doing these type of things or just elevating the music culture. That's not the business that they're in. The year that he mentioned, 1999, I believe I looked that up. That's the year Napster came about and kind of shook the music industry and dropped the blueprint of the songs being online and being shared. It seems like the music industry has never recovered after that.
These people, the Max Martins, would spring up that actually could write the hit songs for the artist. They could build the tracks, things like that, and they would have these superstar producers. That was the era of that. Now we're in the era where there are 7 writers on every song and 8 producers. Nobody can write their own song anymore. Where there is no Joni Mitchell, there's no Stevie Wonder, there's no people that can literally write a song themselves, or at least no one that's trusted by the record label. It used to be that they had to have their, if a record failed, well, listen, I hired this producer, I hired this mixer, and there are people that have had many hits, so I'm safe with my job. Nobody wanted to take a chance, to your point. Now we're at this point where everything is done by committee, right?
Absolutely.
So it has to revert to something else, I think. I agree with you on that.
And someone once told me, they said, there's never been a great work of art created by committee.
Right.
And there are no literary masterpieces. Probably the only exception is the King James version of the Bible, where King James had a committee put that together, and it sealed it up. And it was probably divine intervention, is my theory on that made sure that got through. But for the most part, when you get the committee, things start falling apart. Now, the rule of thumb I have is I look at the song and I count how many chord changes there are. Then I count how many songwriters. And if there are more songwriters than there are chord changes, that's like a warning sign. That's a red, if there are only 4 chords in the song and there are 8 composers, you know, something's going wrong there. But what's really going on there? And to me, this is part of a larger problem. First of all, what's going on is economic, in that being named one of the songwriters is to get you a share of the composing and publishing royalties.
And most of your record executives, they're listed underneath as songwriters. That's how they get their publishing. I'm pretty sure P. Diddy, on a number of songs he never wrote, as we all know, he's not really a songwriter. I'm pretty sure under the publishing checks, he's listed as a songwriter in a lot of music. This is how guys are able to get paid. But the artists don't really have the privilege to put his name sometimes in that paperwork, or they may only cut him maybe a 5% slice and give a bunch of other people who are never in the room percentages of the song. That's pretty much how the music industry works. Overall, it's always been a toxic environment. The fact that everyone gathers in a room and just creates a product and no one wants to talk business, it's already a questionable industry. They kind of made it not a norm to talk about business. Like, imagine walking in the studio and say, hey guys, what's going to be the splits, before you even do anything. They made that person right there the awkward guy. Yo, don't ask that. Get the fuck out of the studio.
So this is almost like the stock options you give somebody. You're hiring a team to run a tech company and you want to get this person involved, and you give them a little taste of the action, and this person gets to dip their beak. And so what's happening is it's almost like a negotiation over how you're going to allocate the money, and then that shows up as the songwriting credits. Now maybe this makes sense financially, but it's ominous from a creative standpoint. And to me, it reflects the larger change in the music industry that alarms me tremendously, which is record labels are turning into intellectual property management companies, IP management, in that they're not trying to get the next great record. They're trying to build a copyright portfolio.
Right.
Ooh. That sounds like the music business to me. And that right there could be the disconnect between artists and record labels. They're not there necessarily to sell your music. They're just hoping you get a few hits, and they own the copyright, almost like Kanye with Adidas. They own the patent to all his shoes. They own all the designs, all the patents to the technology. It's a very similar structure. I believe the experience that Kanye West had in the music industry, he's experiencing it in the fashion world. It's possible that one blueprint actually rules most of commerce around the world. And it could stem from the blueprint of slavery, where you basically have people working for free. That might be the blueprint of just human beings overall. We just subconsciously try to think of ourselves a lot better than that. But low key, if you look at the way things are set up, everyone's trying to escape that sort of structure within their everyday life. When it comes to work, loans, even student loans, there's just sort of a predatory existence in some of these institutional structures that we see throughout the world, not just America, but throughout the world.
Portfolio of songs. And the people that run these things are bankers, lawyers, and accountants. Now, God bless them. I love bankers.
All people who understand contract language. Do you notice that?
I love lawyers, especially lawyers working for me. I love accountants, but I want people that are guitarists and piano players and sax players and bassists and drummers. These are the people I want involved in the creative end of the music business. Now, here's a fact that you're not going to hear elsewhere because it's sort of hidden in the financial statements. Look at Universal Music Group. You said before they have 32% of the songs out there.
Right.
What people don't know is they are growing their publishing business 5 times as fast as their recorded music business. So people look at Universal Music, so this is a recording company. Well, not for much longer, because the only thing they want to invest in is publishing rights. Now, what does this mean? Publishing rights means you own part of an old song. You might be buying a song that was written 20 years ago, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, whatever. When you do a recording, you're focused on the future. I'm going to create music that never existed before.
Right.
I'm going to build an artist. I'm going to build a career. It is very dangerous for the culture to have companies like Universal Music care more about the past than about the future. People ask me all the time, why is the music culture feel so stagnant? I said, this is by design. The people running these companies would rather have you listen to an old song than a new song. And this gets back to the AI, especially if in the future they fear that these AI songs are going to steal their royalties. Their response is going to be to peddle license agreements of their old songs. They're going to try to get them in TV commercials or whatever. And once again,
Because they have the access to. Let's keep that in mind. They have the access to pitch it for TV commercials, movies, etc. It's the same investors. So they're leveraging their copyright for the music and also their access to all these institutional projects like the next Fast and Furious movie or the next Marvel movie by Disney or whatever company owns it, or DC. And they can actually pitch their music to these companies first. A regular artist or just a regular independent artist don't have that type of access, even if they own 100% of their copyright or just their royalties or publisher.
God bless them. I hope they make a lot of money, and I hope they have the nice flight on the corporate jet and all the things that these execs want. But this is not healthy for our culture, because somebody should be investing in the future of music.
And the current generations are not going to go back and listen to some of these songs. It's not a guarantee that, especially with streaming, the way it came about out of nowhere, that people are going to go back and listen to some of these songs. It is not a guarantee. Because now the way things are curated is through algorithms. So people may be watching movies or their personal favorite content creators, and they don't necessarily have these Marvin Gaye songs from back in the day or Beatles or Michael Jackson. There's going to be a generation coming up that's not even going to have the access in their algorithm to consume that type of music. Just their algorithms might be on something completely different that doesn't even involve music or involves music that's current day to them. That's one thing these record label executives never consider.
And if all the large companies want is these old songs, we're in trouble. And it's not just Universal Music Group. Sony's doing the same thing. They just cut a $500 million catalog purchase the other day. Concord was trying to buy this portfolio. All the record companies have lost faith in the record business. And this can't be a good thing if you love music. What they're doing fundamentally won't work for them.
Right.
In the old days, the record labels knew how to launch new stars. It's never been easy.
Right.
But at least they took care. They tried to scout good talent. They would hire a good producer. They would get good songwriters. And then they would take this new artist and they would invest in marketing. Maybe there was some payola too. I don't know. But it's basically...
Oh, yeah, there was definitely payola.
They could take new stars and develop them, which they needed for their future. They had to do this. They had no choice. What you see lately is they've either lost the ability to do that or the interest in doing it, or probably both. What I see is, I actually had an A&R person from a label call me up because he wanted to argue about one of my articles. And I was going back and forth with this guy. And at one point he said, Ted, I got to admit, you're right. We would never sign a new artist now unless they already had an audience on TikTok.
Right.
Basically, he was saying, we don't have a clue how to build a career.
Right.
We got to find someone who's already doing it. But what benefit is there?
There's got to be metrics to show the correlation between that TikTok audience converting into consumers of the music. Like, do they have the data on that they actually go to Spotify where that stream counts as a paid stream, or YouTube where they're running ads on that stream? Is there a conversion there? I feel like there's a magical assumption that there's a conversion with TikTok and the overall artists. There's been quite enough data to show that there's artists out there that have millions of followers on Instagram and cannot sell it a 2,000 seat venue. The metaverse and the universe, it sometimes doesn't really correlate. But I like how these tech companies, in order to proposition their product as something that's useful, as a tool, they kind of just say, hey, we're promoting artists, or we're a means of distribution to develop a certain product that consumers will love. The data has got to be more widely available on that.
For the record label at that point, because they're going to have to give away the store to sign up that people. That's already happened.
That's right. It's already happened.
Back in our day, you got a record contract. If you got 10, 15% royalties, that was the best you were going to possibly do.
Yeah.
But nowadays, they have to go to these TikTok stores and say, we'll give you 50%.
That's right.
And
you wonder what deal they cut Drake. This is why, in a way, he couldn't lose to Kendrick Lamar. There had to have been a whole machine behind him designing things in a way where he can't lose. Because even with the claims that Kendrick was making against him, you've seen a lot of major publications like Billboard, all the ones that are underneath all the record labels that we know of. Billboard, Complex, the Pitchforks. A lot of these publications are really in cahoots with the record labels, but they kind of defended Drake's honor, and there's a lot of money invested in the guy. They didn't give him all that money for no reason. He's probably got to produce 10 more albums, which is insane. We're about to really watch if this guy is going to monkey dance his ass for another 10 years and really have us sitting there watching him thinking this guy really thinks that he should be a #1 artist in this culture that moves a mile a minute. Like, this shit is completely inorganic.
after 5 years, you go in the Masters, and they have to give away everything to get these people because the label has no leverage. The TikTok star does.
That's right.
So they're fundamentally pursuing a strategy that's not going to work for the record label. What they should do is, once again, I'm going back to this movie industry analogy, they should be willing to take risks. They should build up their ability to identify promising young talent.
It's hard for them to take risk because they dummy down their music product so bad that now it's just a fucking stream. To even have Spotify announce that someone listening to your music on a platform is a fraction of a penny, that in itself is the music industry dumbing down their product so bad that it's almost a double trap. It's like, yeah, the record labels are getting paid on the back end with Spotify stock or just a percentage of their overall revenue. But at the end of the day, you told the public that listening to the product you guys put out, which is music, only costs a fraction of a penny per stream. It's a double-edged sword, man. The music industry kind of dummied themselves down into a corner where they can't really all of a sudden say, oh, pay $20 a month to be on our music platform, when you just told us for all these years to listen to it on Spotify was a fraction of a penny per stream. Shit doesn't make any sense. But that's the music industry always dumbing down their product. When it comes to the tech, they've done it before. They've done it with Apple, with the iPod, breaking up a CD sale into individual songs for $1, and they did it with streaming. This shit is their own damn fault.
Sign them, nurture and develop that talent, and create the next generation of stars. That would be good for them, it would be good for the musician, and it would be good for us as audience members, because we have something exciting, something new, something fresh, something different, and not just we're going to peddle the license deal of a song written 30 years ago, which is, about as exciting as day-old bread.
So this conversation was a great correlation to a lot of what's going on in the industry as far as the relevance and the authenticity of what's going on, the stagnation of the culture, the angst, the feeling of release, I should say, after the Kendrick Lamar DJ Mustard's track. I forgot, Not Like Us. I'm about to forget the name of the track, but this right here is a great correlation to what's going on within the industry, and you see it play out in hip-hop culture. Just the stagnation. The culture has never been this stagnant ever in its history. And for Drake to be comfortable in order to enrich just himself, he's actually become a poison to the culture. The fact that you're one of the few guys who can actually sell out stadiums. It's you and like 3 other guys. You're comfortable with that? Like, you think the culture could progress off of that? What are you doing to improve that? Besides bragging album after album, you're number one. You got a girl pinned up somewhere. It's just like the same repetitive shit. Like, the culture is just, it has major anxiety for something new. But the techies are definitely not in the business of furthering music culture. They're just into the business of furthering their platforms and kind of scaling things down on the backs of creativity, which has always been done by the music industry. But it's almost like two devils right now, the overall record labels and the streaming companies, which really had the decision to start fresh without the record labels, but they chose to partner up with them regardless. Because at the end of the day, it's all the same institutional investors. The same people who invest in Universal Music, they got their money tied up in Spotify, or they got their money tied up in Apple. It's all the same people. And just one more thing about the stagnation, we see it play out even in tech. It's gotten to a point where you got guys like Mark Zuckerberg just goes out and tries to buy out the next app or just copy it. So tech is really in an inflection point where they're starting to see the same type of stagnation. There's no real new apps. Guys are just consolidating and trying to gobble up any newcomers into the space. But I'm just going to leave it at this for today. But until next time, you fellas stay safe. Peace.